Greetings, everyone. My name is Irina Malakovska, and this is Make Your Innovations Work. And today I'm very pleased and eager to meet Jorge Suárez. I've met Jorge in Sweden, and we've done the same sustainability management leadership program from Swedish Institute. And I find Jorge experience and entrepreneurial journey especially inspiring. He has an amazing roadmap and journey of corporate and consultancy and co-founding. I mean, any kind of experience. So, Jorge, can you tell a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now? What is Every is about?
Okay, so hey, hi to all the audience. I'm based in Mexico. I'm originally Colombian, but I've been here for 18 years. I tried to escape Mexico with a job rotation in Sweden back in 10 years ago, but I didn't manage the cold and the weather, and then I came back in 2015. So it's been already some time in Mexico. And Mexico sort of attracts you. I know I was drawn to this country, and I stayed ever since. I mean, I thought it was going to be a few years, but then I basically did my adult life here. So I've been living here more in this city than any other city. So when they ask me, I people still ask me, "Hey, do you like to go home?" It's like home is Mexico, but yeah, I say it's when you are between countries and you should feel the same. It's all these contradictions all
Yeah.
the time. So basically, I've been working with electric mobility in the last 11 years. I worked with Volvo for 12 years, and then with NG to sort of make the first projects in Mexico work. So that means electric buses, charging infrastructure. So we had a unit in NG that sort of put together projects and invested in projects, and we did a few like charging hubs for logistics fleets. So basically, they were like let's say stepping stones for more developments in the market. So we were there, and then I was in a startup for a few years, but then I realized that when you have very independent thinking, it's better to have your own startup. So that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years, and of course it's been a journey. Like when we leave the corporate world, it's always sort of a recalibration effort all the time. You think you want to do this, and then you want to do this, and then it's very iterative. So in the first 3 years, sorry, in the last 3 years, I've just been sort of building a concept of a company. We started with simple consulting, advising a firm that was a Mexican firm called Megaflux in sort of their go-to-market strategy. They build motors and battery systems for heavy-duty vehicles. So I've been supporting them ever since. So they've been like my key customer. And then other engagements with, let's say, development agencies, some governments in Mexico, international organizations, like doing consulting reports mostly, and designing charging depots for electric buses mostly. And more recently, I've been, like you realize when you have these new infrastructures, but that there's a need for data platforms, and digital transformation is a big, let's say, pillar in that journey. So I've been looking into blockchain, but applied not crypto, which I think is blah blah, but rather how blockchain can be integrated in charging services, public transport contracts, payment systems. So yeah, so it's when I say it's recalibration, it is recalibration continually.
And here I have two questions. First question, you have an extensive experience working in Latin America, Europe, and you have different type of education. I mean, you have European degree and you have non-European degree. So in terms of that, can you just, I don't know, sum up what's the core difference between like this entrepreneurship in countries you were working in or business mindset?
I would say more developed countries, they have very mature ecosystems. and probably I think innovation in many countries is like digital innovation. Uh, why is more like how do you put together efficiency mechanisms efficiency mechanisms to make already existing systems more efficient. So, so when you are in let's say mature economies or industrialized countries, so to say, everything relatively works to a
Mm,
certain extent. So innovation is more about efficiency, I would say. We coming from Latin America, and you probably could say the same coming from Ukraine, things are not everything is not up to standard. So you find pockets of the country that are very developed, but you also find areas that are very impoverished. So you have these dual economies that are just coming all around Asia, Latin America. So you sort of have you can live in two countries at the same time, and things are not mature, but that's actually the opportunity for, let's say, interdisciplinary or professionals looking to innovate from a different perspective. So I when I was in US or Europe, yeah, I was triggered by the innovation, but I was not part of the, let's say, innovation community, right? I was more on yeah, I have a job, right? But that's not, I mean, you have the corporate protection,
yeah.
and it was not something I could relate to. I think when you innovate, it's important to relate to the environment, to the problems, the pain points. By understanding reality on the ground is when you can innovate, and and I have the problem that I see like possibilities in a lot of things when things are not inefficient, when systems don't work. I mean, you see cracks in the system, and basically every crack could be a potential innovation opportunity. I mean, then the maturity comes in terms of, is this worthwhile to pursue, or should I focus in something else? So keep focus when you have many opportunities around. I think is key.
So may I like just suggest that this was one of the reasons you decided to reside in Mexico?
Yes, I
So
think
this
I
like diversity of challenges.
correct. Like say my sister lives in Washington D.C., right? And she's a doctor, but she's always like I mean, she's been there for over 10 years, but there's this gap sometimes in the, I mean, your culture and your environment, and I always felt that was sort of a gap when I was there. It's like I have all this innovation, but I don't know how to connect it. I was not connected to the ground, so I felt like there was something off. But I did have, I mean, going there, of course, gave me ideas about
Hmm.
technology because they are more advanced, right? When I started looking into electric vehicles, I mean, Sweden at the time and Volvo at the time was at the forefront in Europe. But then, the Chinese sort of pushed let's say, pushed the wheel, and then they are ahead today, right? But then, that sort of triggered innovation because you can innovate when you know different things. I mean, if you
Yeah.
always focused on, we say that which in Mexico we say workshop blindness. Is like when you're focused on only one thing, you don't have ideas. By being in other countries, being in different industries, mobility, energy, talking to different people, looking into the complexities of implementation on the ground, you sort of realize, oh, what are the pain points, and yeah. So yeah, just to answer your question, that's what sort of drives me forward.
It's amazing. And here I would like to jump to my next question. So, uh, you told that you're a very independent. That's why you decided to run your own business because, I mean, for those type of people, there is no space in like corporate startups. I mean, any kind of structure because they're always eager to create their own structure. So
Correct.
when I mean, you, though you've built a successful corporate career, so when you understood that it's time to move on. What was the trigger
Um,
point?
I think corporations have a certain size that you need structure and processes, right? And you have a lot of overseeing, which is, of course, shareholders, government regulations, etc., right? And even more complex when you are in different countries. So I think organizations do have a meaning in deploying control mechanisms because it's efficient, right? However, the system just starts self-serving, and I think that's sort of, there's basically sociological literature about this, like bureaucracies and all that, and of course you can look from a critical standpoint or probably cynical standpoint, but you have to understand why that is there. I always felt that I wanted to innovate, and I was always the one with the crazy ideas. Let's say I remember when I moved to Mexico. So I was like, why don't buses have low entry buses? They have step buses. And I thought that's very inefficient. And plus, it doesn't look as nice because I'm very visual. But I was more about efficiency. And people say, no, they don't need that here. And I said, let's bring a bus. And then, I not to, not to be modest, but now it became, after I did that, it sort of became a standard in the industry, and then you find a lot of buses. Basically every bus that has a certain kind of design standard, it comes with that. So things like that sort of helped me in my early days, right? Because you shine, right? You're above your peers. So I was a manager with age 26. So because I had this master's in the States, and I came here, and I was very, like I was let, I had the support to make things happen because it was a new market. When markets become mature, then there's a need for control, managing, rather than putting a seed that's going to grow. So in that moment, and I didn't realize, I look back and I say, of course, not to blame the corporations. Of course, there's a lot of things to blame, but there's a structure to manage a complex organization, right? So then I go to Sweden, and that's more mature, and it's a headquarter organization. Then there's more need for control, basically because they don't have market, let's say, exposure. They manage a company, and then there's more focus on control and processes. So um, then I came back. I was there, and then I said, no, I want to make this happen. And at the time, I said, I'm going to switch to an energy firm that were sort of innovating in South America. So I was in energy, deploying the first fleet. So, an energy firms has a setup that is very flexible, right? Energy firms are investment companies based on, let's say, focus on the
Hmm.
energy market, right? But they are thought, to invest in energy asset and then sell it afterwards. So, there's a lot of consolidations. So it's flexible in that regard. So, there was interest in this, and we basically were given budget to create things, which was amazing, right? So I had this over $1 million to make some projects happen. We invested, and it happened, right? So, that development cost it's taken care of. Then, of course, there was a restructuring. We were sold to these, let's say, equity funds, so to say. Uh, but then, it was sort of a startup with equity investment, right? Like equity funds, right? Private equity. But that has other, let's say, constraints, and it's about gaining scale,
Yeah.
investing and growing. And that works in the digital world because basically the cell phone is just a way to scale it up, you know? I mean, you roll out, you create a network effect, and then you scale up. When you are in hardware things, vehicles, infrastructure, that means government, that means regulations, that means a lot. So you cannot scale it up. So It's not necessarily replicable, even though you may have, let's say, solar panels or um, storage or electric vehicles. Yes, the technology is there, but the enabling elements around it are very particular to each space, right? Not because there's something in Mexico City, it will happen necessarily in Monterrey. There's another context. Then the government supports that a lot. Like, let's say solar panels that exploded. I mean, that became commonplace, right? I mean, everyone with an SME in Mexico, they probably have solar panels. But that required a lot of government support. It was not so. These markets do require it's either institutional support of money. I mean, in Europe, it's money. Here, it's more institutional. Financing available. Blah 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 blah. So yeah, so I think that's the big difference. So when I realized that probably it was time, yeah, I just felt sick, right?
Because of too
Because
much pressure.
not really. I think it was more of the micromanagement.
Okay,
Um, and
you mean
probably
from private equity?
yeah, yes, but I think I mean, you have to understand why they think like that.
Yeah.
You know, because you can go into the blame game, and I think it's easy to lose perspective. Of course, there are things that probably you don't like, but I mean, just to be fair, I think my reading now is you don't share values. I think that's the underlying problem. I liked some people there, but I think we didn't share values, even when I liked some people, right? But I said, things were, developing a certain way that I was not happy, and I probably, um, I was forced to make a decision, basically. Then comes a lot of frustration because you have to make peace with your, the past, and especially if you are an overachiever, as I've been all my life, it is difficult to have those breakdowns because your tolerance for frustration may be not as developed, so you have to make peace with that. And over time, that sort of conciliation with the past. So basically, you have to balance out, like, uh, grief but innovation at the same time,
Hmm.
and that doesn't combine. So when you ask me, I mean, it's been a journey, and you never finish. So at the beginning, I was very low energy 2 years ago. Like, what should I do? What should I focus on? Then the first challenge is like, who am I without an institutional support from a company? Is what is my brand? Who is it? Who is Jorge without being an employee of, right? Or probably you don't have a family office behind you, right? Or probably you are not, I mean, you are not necessarily elite in the country you are. I am here. Basically, I'm foreign originally, so I don't have that background, right? So it's a question of how do I build myself from scratch, even though I have all this experience. I'm on my own, right?
So
And it's a
basically, it's
very
when two crises overlaps. I mean, it's some kind of like personal crisis. I mean, like middle age crisis or any. I mean, we all have this crisis during our life
everyone.
where we think ourselves, understand ourselves better, and you also had this situation with your own startup and mm, like this private equity thing. So these two things just overlapped and they hit the target.
Correct. And then how do you survive? How do
Yeah.
you how do you have your small victories? And then you realize, I mean, I think many people just, I mean, if you look at surveys, and how happy are with your job, it's like 20 to 30%. So everyone complains, right? But it's very scary to say, when then I'm going to leave it, right? So I did have a financial cushion, uh, that sort of let me innovate or think through it and not jump in onto the next opportunity and next job. I knew I couldn't do it. That was clear. It's like I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I should not take a job because I know that there's a value conflict and also my
Mhm.
life stage is not that. I already lived it and I learned a lot that helped me be who I am now. So I should be grateful for it. But it's not safer. I mean, what we have realized after the pandemic is having a job is not a safe choice. We think it is, but it's no longer.
It's just
And
more understandable for us. We used to it, yeah.
correct. And people are stick to things that they know, even though they probably don't like it. I mean, let's talk about bad marriages, right? I mean, seriously. So sometimes a job is like that. It's comfortable because it has many benefits, but it's also uncomfortable because you get bored, you get frustrated, you don't control your basically. They asked me what is the difference between a job and having your company, let's say. So I will not romanticize having a company because it's not for everyone. I thought it wasn't for me at the beginning, but then I said, oh, okay, I can do it. This is difficult, but then I can do it. But the difference is, like, in a company you were given an instruction set that you have to follow. When you are more mature, that is not so much an issue when you're younger because you are drawn to learning. But when you already have your own criteria, right, analysis, right, it's more difficult to follow instructions because you already have your own criteria on way to state things. So that is, I think, that's the root of that conflict. But then it's like not, I didn't have financial pressure. I have no kids. I have a step kids. So I didn't have that pressure. I think people with families, they don't have the choice. It's like it's either this or that. So in that respect, I had more flexibility. So it has a lot to do with your own life, basically. But um, so I realized that was the reason, like the conflict and the life stage you were in. However, this is very difficult to do as a solo journey. You're gonna do this alone. I was convinced. I have a book called um, Company of One, right? So I started reading this book
Mm,
because I realized companies. So this effect of growth that is very common. It's a mantra from Silicon Valley that you have to grow, scale. No,
yeah.
make what is it? What is it? MVP. Make it. I don't know how is it. Fire it. I don't know. I mean,
Fail
there's
or die, yeah.
that kind of like hustle. I don't
Yeah.
agree with any of that. I don't agree any of that because I see that that is being replicated in emerging countries, and it's not viable at times. It's very predatory. It's very extractivist. I don't
Yeah.
agree with that. And gaining scale, I realized in the prior company that suddenly they were hiring a lot of people, and then they have to, 2 years later, they have to cut it down. So gaining scale is not better. So I said, I'm going to build this small on purpose because when you have payroll, then you end up working to pay the payroll and not building your company. So that's sort of the first thing is like I have to move out from that scheme. You have to be very lean. You have to live below your means, right? I mean, yes, I need a bigger apartment, but I will keep this one. Yes, focus on efficiency. Yes, I like to travel, but I cannot travel as I did before. You have to, and there's a lot of noise, right? If you go into LinkedIn, probably some people will see this through LinkedIn. Of course, social media, I mean, the worst thing you can do if you're anxious about your career is looking at other people in social media because it's a lot of output, right?
Yeah.
It's not achievement, it's output. Attending events, networking, but it's not getting things done at times. Some people do, but it's, I mean, in life, in business, it's more likely to not get things done or projects have failures than attending an event. So if you're doing that, yes, you have to do networking, but yes, it can trigger your anxiety. And I said it because I went through it, right? But I said, I mean, how to focus? I'm going to be small on purpose. I realize that there's a lot of people who are working in projects similar to mine. They're probably more individual, so they don't have to drive to go and talk to people and build a brand, build a website. They know, so they don't have that. But I don't have all the employees, but that we want the same, and I cannot be a jack of all trades. I like many things, but of course I'm not a specialist in each, right? So I realized this model was okay. We know about this. I know how to say things. I know how to structure ideas. I'm very visual. Things should look neat. I know how to tell a story, but I don't have the payroll. So how do I act? We partner with other people. They use our brand, so to say, and we try to give, let's say, customized solution. That's not so scalable, but at least sort of helps us keeping our overhead super low, and taking care of your having basically cash flow before things happen. And if you are in, let's say, a field like energy transition, working in a small company, I mean, you have to be patient. Like, things will not happen overnight. You're gonna have to talk to a lot of people, but things do happen eventually. Like, if we want to have projects in the second half of the year, we know we have to do a lot of work and talk to a lot of people in the first half of the year, and things sort of fall into place in July, and then we have to deliver things in probably the last day of December. But that's how it works. So we realize it works like that. Yeah. So
So it's
uh,
like, I mean, just to sum up, I like your idea about this. Let's say sustainable growth over just overnight, or predator growth, or even business model, because most of these predator style projects or startups from Silicon Valley or any other region, they die too fast. I mean, people invest money, people start to use, but then something goes wrong just because life happens, and it was maybe too fast for founder. They were not mature enough for market, for whatever. So most of them fail, and there is a theory that this is a good thing. We need a quantity which could become quality at one point, but I think at some point it's a little bit of waste of resources.
yeah.
So there is another way, and I like that you bring in this example that there is another way. So maybe your business model is not for everyone, but the idea behind it is very valuable.
I would say, I've been with founders, and VCs are very sexy,
Yeah,
but I know, it's like, oh, they tell your idea is great, great. And nothing wrong with VCs, but a lot of people forget about that. What is the problem you're solving? And then they focus on the fundraise, because it
yeah,
has a lot. It gives a lot of glamour, right? And then you can expose it in social media. So I think sometimes that sort of adds noise, and I realize, I mean, I've probably seen a company, they have pitched it 100 times. They know what they're doing, but the VCs want apps in a sector that is very industrial. So there's that gap. And these
yeah,
people are brilliant, brilliant, the best. And some of them, let's say, they are like, oh my God, VCs, they make me feel so great. Yes, but who are you serving? And I think focus on clients is like, you start creating that, then probably you think if you need funding, because you don't necessarily need funding, right? So don't I say I won't fall into the trap, because usually external funding becomes with loss of control of your own company, and it
yeah,
really depends where you want to be headed, right? So um and so if I know independence is a value I'm pursuing, that's not the way to go. And obviously adding a lot of people, if you're two people, like my case, which is my partner, right? We are two. We have one discussion. If you add one more people, then you have three, but add more, then you start losing control, right? And I think that creates a lot of inefficiency because that's related to bureaucracies. Then you have to start creating processes, blah blah blah. So it's very important to be lean at the beginning, test small. Don't do a big projects. Probably invite people, for dinner, create relationships, pitch the idea without the cost, and I do this a lot of times. Like, what do you think? Is this a good idea? Because if you don't have filter, if you ask ChatGPT, is this a good idea, they will say yes because they know what you like, right?
Yeah.
So it has like a self-reinforcing mechanism. That's the problem with ChatGPT, basically. But I use it often just to structure my thoughts. But talking to people, it's a low cost way to for MVP.
Yeah.
Instead of investing full, right? So let's say, I don't know if we're running out of times, but there's a company, they wanted to do charging, like EV charging hubs. So basically, they are in the public advertising, like with, I don't know what's the name, billboards, right on the street. I think it's billboards, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so they want to transform the spaces, right? And I wasn't sure that public charging was such a great idea or that profitable because it's failed in different markets due to scale. It's actually worked in Mexico. So I was surprised with ride hailing fleets, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so I had this idea, is like, why don't we create a space for people to wait, which is very basic because you at least have to spend half an hour, if you use public charging. So gas stations is about flow.
Yeah.
Charging is about waiting. How do you make a valuable waiting time? So this guy knows a lot about permits, city, advertising, which provides already revenue stream. And I say, why don't we use the revenue stream to actually make something happen on the ground, like a co-work cafe, blah blah blah. We are still in that definition. I said we have to create a journey. And I know, like, journey, my sister works in that. My sister in Colombia works in CX, UX, blah blah blah, service design, that kind of thing. So I know about different things. And I said, I like this because it's visual, but I know I have to ally with another company. We did that. There's a lot of small companies already doing what you want. Do a partnership. That's a way to create a product. Someone is already investing in that. So I think that's a more lean. If you fail, that you didn't burn $1 million, and then you get validation from your potential customer or your customer to be. And I said, okay, right, you are not ready to pay me $300, $300,000 for this, but I can put sweat equity plus some cash to run my operations, and we split the risk, right? So that's the sort of like the way to innovate. You have to create the contracts to do that, but you only get there by testing. And I mean, not to say that I'm right. I don't think I'm right. I see it that way because it works for me. But I think there's alternative ways for starting up. It's not always a global organization. It doesn't have to be. I think a sustainable organization it can last a number of years. It can create value, right? Uh, you work, but you enjoy it. You're not a slave to pay, let's say, payrolls or pay taxes, but making it more organic, so to say. But that's work for me. That doesn't have to work with everyone else. And doing partnerships, I think that's a good way to scale up without the risk of a scale.
Yeah, it's amazing. And just like to sum up, so basically, corporations, established business, and mature economies are good to learn from. They provide you with framework, process, and you could like test things, understand how they work. And it's a great
Exactly.
opportunity when you're young.
Safe,
Because it's
safer.
like, well, it's safer and it's foundation. I mean, fundamentals of how it works. And when you
Macroeconomic.
feel that you want to improve too many things,
That
and
doesn't
you're,
work.
yeah, so you may think about starting your own business, but at this stage, it's important to test your idea in cheap ways, like partnership, talk to people, not try to build the same corporation you were
Or
working in.
empire.
Yeah, I mean, I see this all over the time with startups, with people who came from corporations. They think this corporate mind, they don't think cheap, and this
Exactly.
kills their business at the very early stage. And if they have enough financial investments or saving, they may survive for some time, but eventually, if they don't change mindset, this will kill them. And the end point, maybe it's not looking for a investment and the scale itself as the
No,
end point, so those are
no.
means, but be
Correct.
very accurate about who you're choosing to become your partner. Because
Correct.
if you share this decision making power, you need to be confident that at least you're serving the same goal, like customers or pain points,
Values.
values. Yeah,
Say
because
values. That's
otherwise
key.
you become employee in your own business eventually, because someone
That
just
happens.
tell you what to do and you are running away from people who are telling you what to
And then
do, and it's a trap.
you may have a board coup and you're expelled
Yeah, and
if
you're
you're
expelled. And
exactly.
yeah, and it may even be worse, I mean, mentally, because you see like your kid is growing without you, something relevant. Most of the founders are very tuned to their business idea.
And then you get bitter and
Yeah,
frustrated.
yeah, I
And
mean
that
yeah, and
doesn't serve
grief,
you.
sadness. Yeah.
Griefs. Look, I don't know if we have extra minutes. I was, I share with you a piece I wrote, and this happened. I mean, when I left that job, that happened 3 years ago. I thought that I had processed it. I started writing an article, and I realized when I wrote it that I had like PTSD. It was so difficult to write it. It's like I'm not. It's about how I feel, but I realized I was. It was a trauma experience. It was traumatic. But then after I did it, at, at that very week, it was so crazy. It felt so painful that I finally made peace because yes, you're upset. Yes, you probably were taken advantage of, but that's okay. But you get liberated, right? I hadn't done that. That was missing in my journey. And I
Okay.
realized, yeah. So, yeah.
No, it's amazing. And one my last question to you, just like one short killing advice for anyone who is something in between this entrepreneurial crisis. What would you like recommend, or your best killing advice for any entrepreneur and founder?
Um, First, it really depends on where you want to go. I know that complexity adds conflict, right? And I rather keep it more contained, probably because I iterate a lot and it's cheaper to do it on your own without involving too many people and investors and all.
Hmm.
If I have already a mature idea and tested it, you probably can scale it up. But then you should think, do I need to do it? Right? I know I don't need to do it because I focus more on the planning of things, which is missing oftentimes, and I know I do that well. Probably in execution, there's a lot of people who do execution. That's okay. And oftentimes, I don't think it's a good. I don't think it's a good. Let's say making decisions based on pain or
Hmm.
ambition. Sometimes, probably that's not a good starting point. And you should not be. I mean, it's very difficult when you are stuck in a place and you want to build something else. That's a difficult place to be. uh, I would say the safest way is, if you are in that crisis, start saving, start living below your means, start building cash, like your cash flow, your runway, before jumping into it. I would say do it if you feel it's a live, like a live signal, right? But you don't have to go there, because it also has its complexities. It's not gonna be romanticized. It's not gonna be like that. It has its own. I realize I like it, and I manage risk, right? Because I'm conservative and I'm responsible with my finances. Um, and also control the ambitions, in the sense, not a good thing doesn't have to be large per se. It has to be sustainable. And I'm not saying environmental sustainable,
No, no,
ideally,
no. Like
saying
broader content. Yeah.
self-sustaining, sustaining. It can stand on its own, let's say, qualities, right? It's very difficult because we are exposed to overstimulation, and then we
Yeah.
think we should do something else, right? So
So yeah, staying true to yourself, your scale, size, values. I mean, it's
values,
a
values.
yeah, it's a great way to avoid any kind of like burnout trap or whatever. Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you
Correct,
so
Irina.
much, Jorge, for bringing this Mexican energy to my podcast and sharing your stories. I have a bunch of notes and a lot of ideas of yours resonates to me, and very
You know
happy
what
that
always helps? We are very, let's say, video driven today. Everything is on video. But
yeah,
I think writing makes your head clear.
yeah,
It takes time. It's also a catharsis. So I think it's always to write. It's always good to write. I think that's, when people post, let's say, visuals, that's one thing. When you post a writing, probably you have one or two likes, but you don't want it for the attention. You do it for the sake of writing. And I think, so I started doing that, and I feel better. Uh, when I'm sort of going through many ideas, I think you can write, and eventually you would have a good piece, and you have a good article, I would say. Also, that's also an advice.
yeah, and also very good for your brain activity because like neurons connect our body and help to stay say longer. I mean, in active phase of our brain activity, mentality, and whatever. So yeah, writing
Yeah.
is a great thing. Live writing. Thank you so much one more time, Jorge, for spending this like almost an hour with me and my guests. And thank you, everyone who are watching us live, and for those who are going to watch us later to record. So feel free to reach out me or Jorge later, and I will share the book Jorge mentioned in comments to this podcast later because I will also want to read it. So one more on my reading list. Thank you for that.